Floyd Mayweather is one of the greatest boxers of all time, retired undefeated, 50-0, a 5-division champion with endless Hall of Famers on his record. But there's a lot of discourse and a lot of discussion about how good his resume actually is. So just like I've done on this channel to several boxers, I'm going to go through every single opponent on Floyd's record, and I'm going to rank them based on this criteria, based on how good they were, what form were they in, what were the circumstances surrounding the fight, and by the end of it we'll give Floyd a score. Floyd was an Olympic silver medalist before turning pro, and made his debut in October 1996. As it usually goes on these videos, the first 10 or so opponents on someone's record are not worth talking about. In fact, all of his first 16 opponents are going to be automatically sorted into the D tier, all the way up to his title eliminator bout versus Tony Pep. 2 years after his debut, he took on 38-6 Tony Pep. Tony Pep had previously won the IBO lightweight title, but realistically the IBO title is quite meaningless. He'd previously fought for the 130-pound world title versus Rogelio Tur in a reasonably competitive fight. He'd taken some losses, but always to higher level opponents. He travelled quite well, won fights in the UK, won fights in the US, won fights in Canada. He was a respectable step-up opponent. I'm going to put him in the B tier. Then Floyd fights for his first world title versus Genaro Hernandez. This is a fight that I don't think Floyd gets enough credit for, especially considering he was 21 years old at the time. The single loss in Genaro's career was a weight class higher versus a prime Oscar de la Hoya 3 years ago. He then moved back down to 130 to face WBC defending champion Azuma Nelson. He'd win by decision and claim his title. Keeping in mind Azuma Nelson is one of the greatest featherweights of all time. It was an older version of Nelson, but still a Nelson in decent form. Coming off a win over Jesse James Leia to defend his title, Genaro would defend his title 3 more times, the first of which versus future champion Anatoly Alexandrov, then 2 more times versus Carlos Hernandez and Carlos Jarena. Floyd would put on a wonderful performance versus Genaro Hernandez, stopping him in 8 rounds, winning every single round of the fight, and immediately catapulted himself into the boxing world. Hernandez was the best in the division at the time, but he wasn't the most dominant. He did go to 2 close decisions versus Alexandrov, Nelson. He was certainly good, but not quite a pound-for-pound name. I'm going to put Hernandez in the A+ category. Then Floyd defends his title for the first time versus Angel Manfredi. Manfredi had 2 losses to his name at the time, but they both came at the very start of his career. He then went on a 23-fight winning streak, which included a very impressive win over Arturo Gatti. Based on the Gatti win alone, you could justify a very generous ranking for Manfredi. But he was a guy who lost every championship fight he had, including after Floyd when he lost to Stevie Johnson, Diego Corrales. He was certainly world level but not quite a championship caliber fighter. Floyd would stop Manfredi inside 2 rounds, and I'm going to put him in the B+ tier. Mayweather then takes on Carlos Rios. Rios sported a record of 44 wins and 2 losses at the time. He lost his first world title opportunity versus Luis Soto Espinosa by stoppage. In fact, Rios never actually won a fight outside of Argentina in his entire career. I think by definition we have to put Carlos Rios in the C tier as a regional fighter. He took Floyd the distance, but Floyd would win every single round. Floyd then took on 33-2 Justin Juco. Juco is a guy who travelled quite well. He won fights in the UK, won fights in the US, won fights in Uganda. But similar to Carlos Rios, when he travelled, he never beat anyone of note. In fact, in his previous fight before losing to Floyd, 3 months previously he lost by knockout to Antonio Hernandez, who had a record of 49 wins and 22 losses. So I'm not sure how Juco got the shot to face Floyd in the first place. Once again, Juco is going to go in the C tier. Floyd then takes on 34-2 Carlos Jarena. I mentioned Jarena previously as one of the 3 title defences for Genaro Hernandez. A fight that was somewhat competitive, went to a 117-113 decision. He then lost another close decision versus Orlando Salido, so historically he has done well versus world level opponents. With the exception of Floyd himself, who'd win every single round and stop him inside 7 rounds, I'm going to put Carlos Jarena as a B tier win. Floyd then takes on Gregorio Goyo Vargas. Vargas had a record of 40 wins and 6 losses at the time. Vargas was actually a world champion 7 years ago at featherweight, after stopping defending champion Paul Hodgkinson. He then lost that title immediately by close decision versus Kevin Kelly, was given another title shot versus John Molina and lost again. But coming up to the fight versus Floyd, he was on a decent winning streak, which included decent title challenges like Ben Taki and Tracy Patterson. I think it's fair enough to say that Vargas was a world level opponent, and for that reason he goes in the B+ tier. Then Floyd takes on Emmanuel Augustus, who some of you may know as the Drunken Master, despite his reputation which largely comes from the trouble he gave Floyd in their fight. Augustus's record is basically win-loss, 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 win-loss. His record at that time was 22 wins, 16 losses and 4 draws. But what stands out are the occasional names he'd pick up when he did win a fight. Augustus scored several upsets across his career, which included 21-0 prospect Terrell Finger, 45-1 Fred Ladd, stopping 37-1 Carlos Vilches on 2 days' notice. Floyd does say himself this was the toughest fight of his career. Not the closest, but the toughest in terms of where he had to go to pull out the win. I can't put Augustus too high because he did lose once every 1 or 2 fights, but I think B tier is fair enough to say he's almost world level, as Floyd would stop him in the 9th round. Floyd then takes on IBF champion Diego Corrales. This is the one fight in Floyd's career in terms of the betting odds that Floyd was the most favoured to lose, as the odds closed with Floyd as an underdog. Floyd was an underdog briefly going into the fight versus Genaro Hernandez, and at one point versus Oscar De La Hoya later on, but this time it was a common opinion that Floyd may lose this fight. Corrales was in spectacular form by this point. He won the world title versus defending undefeated champion Roberto Garcia, and would have 4 defences to that title, including versus Derek Gainer, who went on to become a featherweight champion, then knocked out the previously mentioned B-plus opponents Angel Manfredi inside 3 rounds. Corrales was viewed at this point as simultaneously a very impressive boxer and a very impressive puncher. He was 33-0 going into the fight versus Floyd, and had a considerable frame advantage over Floyd, which is mainly the reason a lot of people picked Corrales to win. In fact, Corrales was above Floyd in the pound-for-pound rankings at the time, Corrales at 5 and Floyd at 7. Floyd would arguably put on the best performance in super featherweight history, completely schooling and tearing apart Corrales inside 10 rounds. Similar to the Genaro Hernandez fight where he exceeds expectations, I think Corrales deserves an A++ ranking. Then Floyd returns to face Carlos Hernandez. In this fight, Floyd actually takes the first official knockdown of his career. This is about the time where Floyd's hand issues start to flare up. He hits Hernandez on the top of the head with a left hook, but injures his hand in the process, causing him to react, drop his knees and touch the canvas. Obviously this isn't a traditional knockdown, but it happened. Despite this, Floyd would go on to win the fight by decision. Carlos Hernandez had previously lost to Genaro Hernandez, but actually went on to become a champion after facing Floyd, winning the vacant IBF title, and defending it once before losing to Eric Morales. Normally being a world champion should guarantee a B+ or A tier spot, but it was a vacant title which he won at the time versus David Santos, who was coming off a loss, and Hernandez didn't really pick up any signature wins outside of being champion at one point, so I think Carlos Hernandez is going to be a B tier opponent. Then Floyd takes on Jesus Chavez. Chavez was 35-1 at the time. Chavez once again didn't do much before the fight versus Floyd, but it's afterwards that he stands out, stopping previously mentioned B tier opponent Carlos Llerena, and winning the WBC super featherweight title versus Thai boxer Siramongkong Iamthuam, before immediately losing his title to Eric Morales. Chavez also beat the previously mentioned Carlos Hernandez. I think Chavez having 2 wins over B tier opponents and being a world champion, I'd say Jesus Chavez has earned a spot in the B+ tier. Then finally, after 6 years in the super featherweight division, Floyd moves up to 135 to face the defending champion Jose Luis Castillo. A few years previously, Castillo was viewed as a regional level Mexican boxer. By the year 2000, he was 40 wins, 4 losses and no championship fights to his name. That was until he was given a shot versus the best lightweight on the planet at the time, Stevie Johnston. This was expected to be a routine title defence for Johnson. He'd been champion for the past 3 years. But Castillo pulls off the upset and wins the fight by decision. They had a rematch which went to a draw. Then Castillo defended his title 2 more times before facing Floyd. Castillo would also go on to win a title again afterwards, and defend that title 2 more times, before finally losing again in one of the best fights in boxing history versus Diego Corrales, but then winning the rematch. The first fight between Castillo and Floyd is arguably the closest and most controversial of his career. Floyd would ultimately end up winning the decision, but people were split. Some people preferred the aggression and pressure of Castillo, others preferred the clean punching and counters of Mayweather. I make it a point in these videos to take a win out of someone's record if I think it's clear enough of a robbery, but I actually don't think this is a robbery. I think you can fair enough give this to Mayweather, but the fight was controversial enough to warrant a rematch, where Floyd would win much clearer. Despite the rocky start to Castillo's career, in both fights he was certainly a championship level fighter, and for that reason this counts as 2 A-tier wins on Floyd's record. Floyd then takes on Victoriano Sosa. Sosa had only fought twice outside the Dominican Republic, the first time being when he fought Paul Spadafora, who was 28-0 at the time, and his title reign spanned over 4 years. Sosa actually dropped Spadafora twice in their fight, and it was a very competitive decision, which Sosa would ultimately lose. The second time Sosa ever fought at the world level was versus Floyd himself, who'd win almost every round. Because of the Spadafora fight, I think you have to at least give Sosa a B tier ranking, but because he didn't do anything outside of that, he stays in the B tier as a B tier opponent. Floyd then takes on Philip Nadeau. Nadeau fought across the world but never really picked up any considerable names in the process. He lost his first fight back immediately after losing to Floyd. He's going to go in the C tier. Floyd then takes on DeMarcus Corley. Corley was previously the WBO super lightweight champion. Defended that title twice before ultimately losing a split decision to Zab Judah. This was Floyd's introduction to the 140-pound division. Because Corley was a defending champion about a year before this, and how close the Judah fight was, I think Corley deserves a B+ ranking. Floyd then takes on Henry Bruce Ellis. Henry's form leading into the fight versus Floyd was quite unimpressive. Not much to talk about here, he's a bit of a warm-up, he goes in the C tier. Floyd then challenges for his third world title in his third weight class versus Arturo Gatti. Gatti was surprisingly on the best form of his career by this point. Despite coming off 3 all-time great wars versus Mickey Ward, he came back to win the vacant super lightweight title afterwards versus Gianluca Branco, who was 32-0 at the time. Defends that title versus 22-0 Leonard Duroftai, then again versus former champion Jesse James Leia. Despite the form that Gatti was on at the time, Floyd would put on maybe his most punishing performance of his entire career, battering Gatti start to finish and stopping him in 6 rounds. I think being a 2-division defending champion and also one of the toughest men in boxing history, Arturo Gatti deserves an A-tier ranking. For the first defense of his new 140-pound world title, Floyd takes on Shambo Mitchell. Mitchell had been floating around just below the title level for about 10 years at this point. He'd fought for the title 3 times, 2 of those instances would be versus Kostya Tszyu, who would stop him both times, and the 3rd time versus Floyd himself. Mitchell was clearly below the championship level, but also at the same time very clearly above the regional level, beating several opponents who I'd maybe consider B-tier wins like Ben Taki, Love Mornadu, Michael Stewart, so I'm going to put Shambo Mitchell in B+. Floyd then attempts to become a 4-division champion, challenging welterweight champion Zab Judah. Judah was a 2-division champion, winning his first belt in the year 2000 in the 140-pound division. Defended that belt 4 times versus decent opponents like Junior Witter, before ultimately losing his belt to Kostya Tszyu in a now famous knockout. I think this infamous knockout and the chaos afterwards sort of overshadows the legacy that Zab Judah has. For a time, Zab Judah was considered to have some of the fastest hands in all of boxing. He would regain a super lightweight title afterwards versus DeMarcus Corley. He went up to welterweight and lost his first title shot versus Corey Spinks, but then came back to win the rematch a year later to become the welterweight champion. Judah was quite inconsistent, but when he was on, he was on. Perfect example of this being when he actually lost his last fight before Floyd versus Carlos Baldomir. A fight that he really should have won, but for whatever reason didn't show up on the day. There was still money in a Floyd versus Judah fight, so they made it anyway. Judah actually turned up quite well when the fight came, winning the first 3 to 4 rounds, but Floyd adjusted and won the fight by decision to make himself a 4-division champion. Judah's a weird one to rank because his record doesn't really reflect his talent. I think on his day he is an A+ or even A++ fighter, but because he quite literally lost his last fight before this, I can only put him in A tier. Then Floyd takes on the guy that beats Zab Judah, Carlos Baldomir. Baldomir was a 10-1 underdog going into the fight versus Zab Judah, but pulls off the win regardless, then goes on to beat Arturo Gatti by knockout. This was yet another fight where Baldomir was the underdog, but once again scores the upset, which for a lot of people showed that the Zab Judah upset was not a fluke. Overall, Baldomir was on a really unexpected resurgence to his career, very similar to Jose Luis Castillo. Floyd would ultimately shut out Baldomir over 12 rounds. I think Baldomir deserves an A-tier ranking because of the form he was on. For a lot of people by this point, Floyd Mayweather was the best in the world pound for pound, and quickly became the biggest star in boxing. But the first real super fight of Floyd's career came when he faced Oscar De La Hoya. De La Hoya was the former face of boxing, Floyd was the new face of boxing. There was a long period of time where De La Hoya was the best boxer in the world. A 6-division champion, winning belts from 130 all the way to 160. He won the super featherweight title all the way back in 1994 versus Jimmy Bredal. Defended that title once before moving up to 135. Won the vacant belt versus Jorge Paez. Defended that title 6 times, including versus Genaro Hernandez and Rafael Ruelas, to become the unified lightweight champion. Then dethroned the legendary Julio Cesar Chavez to become the super lightweight champion. Defended that title once before moving up again to welterweight to face another all-time great in Pernell Sweet Pea Whitaker. So that's 2 all-time greats on his record already, Chavez and Whitaker. Granted, they were both older versions, but they were still defending champions at the time. He defended that title 6 times before ultimately losing to Felix Trinidad, then lost again to Shane Mosley in a razor-close decision. Moves up once again to become a 5-division champion. Defends his 154 world title twice, including versus Fernando Vargas. Loses to Shane Mosley again in a fight I think he should have won. So he moves up once again to 160 to face the undefeated defending champion Felix Sturm. Wins the fight but ultimately loses his first defense versus Bernard Hopkins. So he moves back down to 154, faces Ricardo Mayorga. Wins the super welterweight title and then defends it for the first time versus Floyd himself. Now you can discredit this win for Floyd by saying that De La Hoya was out of his prime, but the only times he'd lost by this point was to Shane Mosley, who I don't think he lost to anyway. A light heavyweight in Bernard Hopkins, and a top 20 all-time great fighter in Felix Trinidad. And also just the way that De La Hoya turned up to face Floyd in the fight proves he was still in form. Unlike when he faced Manny Pacquiao, De La Hoya was swinging start to finish. He's been known for stamina issues in the past, but in round 12 he was really going for it. Not to mention De La Hoya is clearly physically bigger than Floyd in their fight. This is Floyd's first fight at 154, De La Hoya's coming down from 160. I think because this is quite literally an all-time great in decent form with a size advantage, I'm going to say this is an S-tier win for Floyd. Floyd then moves back down to 147 to defend versus Ricky Hatton. Hatton's breakout win came 2 years previously when he knocked out Kostya Tszyu for the super lightweight title. Tried his luck at 147 but had a really tough time versus Luis Collazo despite winning. Then was back in form at super lightweight as he knocked out Jose Luis Castillo in 4 rounds. With a shot to the liver to set up a fight versus Floyd at 147. Floyd would ultimately knock out Ricky Hatton with a check hook in round 10. And I think considering that Ricky went on to beat Paulie Malignaggi afterwards, looking better than ever in the process, this was an in-form championship fighter in Ricky Hatton. I think the Kostya Tszyu win by itself puts him above the typical A-tier standard, so I'm going to put Ricky Hatton in the A+ tier. Floyd then does a fake retirement, disappears for 18 months, then comes back to face Juan Manuel Marquez. Marquez was best known at this point for his 2 controversial fights versus Manny Pacquiao, the first being a draw, the second a close decision for Pacquiao. He'd also notably beat Marco Antonio Barrera for the title, then a knockout over Juan Diaz before the Mayweather fight. However, there is a massive asterisk hanging over this fight concerning the weight. 2 years and 10 months away from that fight, Marquez was fighting at 126. He'd only just moved up to 135 the previous year, and was still made to jump 2 divisions at once to face Mayweather. For that reason, the fight was made at a catch weight. Both fighters would weigh in at 144 pounds. Despite that already being a considerable weight difference in favour of Mayweather, he still misses weight by 2 pounds, weighing in at 146, whereas Marquez came in underweight at 142. Floyd would drop Marquez in the second round and go on to pitch a complete shutout, winning almost every round of the fight. When I did the Pacquiao resume video, I graded Marquez as an A++ win. But when Pacquiao faced Marquez, there was no weirdness with the weight stipulations. They were both roughly the same size anyway. But because Marquez has had to jump up 4 weight divisions over the course of 3 years, and also because Floyd missed weight by 2 pounds, I'm going to downgrade this to an A-tier win. Then Floyd takes on Shane Mosley. Mosley's claim to fame at this point was his 2 wins over Oscar De La Hoya. Granted 2 close controversial wins, but still 2 wins. Mosley's most recent loss at that point was to a young rising contender in Miguel Cotto, but then he came back to knock out Ricardo Mayorga, then stopping Antonio Margarito coming off his own controversial win over Miguel Cotto. That would set up the fight versus Floyd, the fight where Floyd was hurt the most in his entire career, rocking Floyd badly in 2 occasions in round 2. But Floyd showed excellent composure, recovered, and ultimately would win every single round after the second. Now Mosley definitely did show his age in this fight, especially in the second half, but considering this was still a Mosley who just knocked out Antonio Margarito in his previous fight, I think people do over-exaggerate just how washed he was at this point. He definitely can't be an elite win, but I think an A-tier championship level ranking is fair enough. Floyd then takes on Victor Ortiz. Now at the time, Floyd was actually planning to face Andre Berto for the title. Assuming Berto got through his next fight versus Victor Ortiz, Ortiz would upset Berto the same way that Baldomir upset Zab Judah a long time ago. Prior to that fight, Victor Ortiz went to a draw versus Lamont Peterson, who would go on to become champion the next year by beating Amir Khan. The fight versus Floyd would actually turn out to be controversial. Ortiz was getting very frustrated trying to land on Mayweather, so Ortiz blatantly headbutts Floyd. He tries to apologise afterwards, but it's obviously intentional. The referee takes a point off and they resume the action. Ortiz tries to apologise to Floyd again before separating, but the action had resumed at that point, so Floyd hits him with a 2-piece and knocks him out. Now there was a lot of controversy at the time about this fight. Some people saw Floyd's actions as unsportsmanlike, but if you ask me, it's fair enough. Ortiz did blatantly headbutt Floyd, which I consider more unsportsmanlike than what Floyd did. What Floyd did wasn't illegal, it was just cheap. Anyway, in terms of how I grade Ortiz as a win, I'm going to say B+ based on the Berto win. Floyd then takes on Miguel Cotto. Cotto's breakout win came when he beats Shane Mosley. Obviously his momentum was derailed by the infamous Antonio Margarito fight. Then Cotto lost to Manny Pacquiao, but in fairness, that was an invincible form of Manny Pacquiao. Then Cotto gets his revenge versus Antonio Margarito. Not to mention Cotto went on to become middleweight champion, knocking out Sergio Martinez. Floyd ultimately beat Cotto in a hard-fought win. Keeping in mind that Cotto was a massive welterweight. Similar to the De La Hoya win, we have to give credit to that. The size difference wasn't quite as extreme as it was versus Pacquiao, but it was still there. I'm going to put Cotto as an A++ win. Floyd then takes on Robert Guerrero. Guerrero was a former champion, but quite a forgettable one. He won the IBF featherweight title back in 2006, gradually made his way up to welterweight where he beat Andre Berto. Again, Berto was actually supposed to face Floyd after beating Guerrero, but he lost. Since his title run in 2006, Guerrero hadn't lost once, and Floyd would end up beating him comfortably. I think Guerrero is a B+ win. Then Floyd takes on future pound-for-pound star Canelo Alvarez. I actually don't like the excuse that Canelo was too young to face Floyd. Granted, he wasn't in his prime yet, but it's not like he was inexperienced. He won his first world title well over 2 years ago versus Matthew Hatton, and would defend that title 6 times, including versus Shane Mosley, and most impressively a win over Austin Trout, who was coming off a win himself over Miguel Cotto. Canelo was 42-0 with 7 title fights to his name. We've seen guys like Teofimo Lopez face Vasily Lomachenko after one title fight at the age of 23. Salvador Sanchez was 21 when he became champion, defended that title 10 times and faced Azuma Nelson. I think the excuses for Canelo came from how one-sided the fight turned out to be. There was a rehydration clause, but at the same time Floyd is a smaller man in there anyway, so I'd say it evens out. Canelo definitely wasn't an S-tier opponent by that point of his career. I think he only really seriously became elite around 2016, so for that reason I'm going to put Canelo as an A+ win. Then Floyd takes on Marcos Maidana. Maidana is another one of those guys who had a serious resurgence in his career. He'd previously lost to Amir Khan and got shut out by Devon Alexander, but then Maidana made the switch to Robert Garcia as his coach, and the results of his fights began to change. It started with him knocking out the historically durable Josecito Lopez inside 6 rounds, showing both improved boxing and punching ability. Then he was famously scheduled to face Adrian Broner. Broner was an undefeated 2-division champion, and a lot of people saw him as the next Mayweather. He had wickedly fast hands, good punching power, and was coming off a win over Paulie Malignaggi. Broner was expected to beat Maidana, but was surprised to see Maidana being as rough and as difficult as he was. Despite this, Broner kept showboating and being disrespectful in the ring, which in turn led to Maidana dropping Broner with a massive left hook, putting him down for the first time in his career and returning the favour with the showboating. So this was a very dangerous form of Maidana that Floyd was set to face, and the fight being as close as it was would display that, as he gave Floyd a seriously tough fight. There's not too much in terms of accolades to talk about with Maidana, but I think the Broner win and the fight he gave to Floyd speaks for itself. I think a few years ago Maidana would have been an A tier or even a B+ opponent, but because of the form he was on at this point under Robert Garcia, I'm going to bump him all the way up to an A++ win. Mayweather and Maidana would then rematch, this time Floyd beating him even more comfortably, which marks 2 A++ wins on Floyd's record. Then in the biggest best-selling fight in boxing history, Floyd takes on Manny Pacquiao. I don't really need to explain why Pacquiao's so good, but I can give you a brief rundown. He began his career at 105 pounds, the lowest weight division in boxing, and peaked at 154 pounds. Beating Antonio Margarito. The names he beat in that 7-year winning streak from 2005 to 2012, Erik Morales twice, Marco Antonio Barrera, Juan Manuel Marquez, David Diaz, Oscar de la Hoya, Ricky Hatton, Miguel Cotto, Joshua Clottey, Antonio Margarito, Shane Mosley. Not to mention beating a lot of Floyd's common opponents in better fashion. A lot of people point to the fact that Pacquiao got knocked out by Marquez before the Floyd fight, but not the fact he was coming off an incredible win in the rematch versus Tim Bradley Jr. Bradley being a win that I don't think gets enough credit. Bradley's resume contains super lightweight champion Miguel Vasquez, defending super lightweight champion Junior Witter, 27-0 future champion Lamont Peterson, 29-0 Luis Carlos Abregu, defending 21-0 WBC champion Devon Alexander, Ruslan Provodnikov, Juan Manuel Marquez, Jesse Vargas. Bradley was a top 5 pound-for-pound name, and Pacquiao beat him. Despite Pacquiao being in good form, he was still outboxed by Mayweather comfortably, 10-2, 9-3, 8-4 at most. You can say Pacquiao's out of his prime by this point, but at the same time, Floyd is as well. Pacquiao is one of the greatest of all time. I think he has to go in the S tier. Then Floyd finally takes on Andre Berto after about 4 years of planning to face him. There was a time where Berto was held in high regard. Before the upset loss to Victor Ortiz, he was defending champion for about 3 years. He lost to Ortiz, then lost again to Guerrero. He earned the shot versus Floyd after a decent win over Josecito Lopez, but before that he did actually get stopped by Jesus Soto Karass. So it had been years before Berto actually won a fight at the world level. Floyd beats him comfortably, and because of that he's going to go in the B tier. And finally, in the final fight of Floyd's career, his 50th pro fight, he faces UFC fighter Conor McGregor. Because Conor was making his debut at the time, I don't think I can even rank him on this. At the end of the day, it was a gimmick circus fight. I rank opponents in these videos based on their achievements in boxing. McGregor has literally none, not even a loss, so I can't really give him an accurate placement. You could argue the half-released footage between him and Paulie Malignaggi counts, but if we took sparring stories into account, Martin McCauley would be the best heavyweight in the world. I'm going to put Conor in the D tier. I can't give him any points for this win. And that is the finished criteria. Floyd has 2 S tier wins, De La Hoya and Manny Pacquiao, 4 A++ tier wins, Corrales, Cotto and Maidana twice, 3 A+ wins, Hernandez, Hatton and Canelo, several A tier wins, several B+ wins, several B tier wins, only a few C tier wins, about 16 journeymen in his career, plus Conor McGregor. In terms of achievements, he's got 27. In terms of achievements, he's won 27 title fights, 5 division champion, won 8 world titles, 24 champions, which I believe is the most in boxing history. 10 of those opponents held titles during the fight. The total score of Floyd's resume is 143. In terms of the guys I've made videos on already, it's the second best so far. Pacquiao's is 164. Third best is Canelo's with 101. Floyd's resume is a bit underrated and overrated at the same time. He didn't take that many risks in his career, which is where a lot of Pacquiao's S-tier wins come from. If he fought a proper champion by the end of his career, instead of Berto or McGregor, like Keith Thurman or Kell Brook, he could have got an S-tier win because of how old he was by that point. But all of his opponents after Canelo were more or less veterans, so it's more of an even playing field. But there are a lot of wins on Floyd's record that he doesn't get enough credit for, especially Genaro, Hernandez, Diego Corrales. And that will do it for the video. Like and subscribe, leave a comment. Goodbye.